You can never have too many trees for your game. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Black Magic Craft. Today I'm going to be making some trees. I recently started a new campaign with a new group, and this adventure would take place in the far north, and I wanted to have coniferous trees, spruce, pine, that sort of thing. There are a lot of really amazing ways that you can build pine trees. Model railroad guys like Luke Towens have been making fabulous looking, hyper realistic pine trees for a very long time. I don't really think that that method is entirely appropriate for tabletop gaming. When I decided to make my set of pine trees, I had two goals in mind. The first is that these trees be really rugged and durable. I wanted to make sure that they could withstand a fair amount of abuse. I wanted to be able to grab them from the actual tree portion. I didn't want to have to be careful and delicate with them. So they needed to be more rugged and more durable. I also wanted them to be cheap and made out of readily accessible materials, things that people could get in basically any city. And I believe I achieved both these goals. If you already own some flocking, which you should, and if you already own some tacky spray adhesive, which you should, then the materials needed to make a set of these trees costs dollars. You can make 20 trees for $3 if you already have the flocking and the glue. It's materials that I believe you can buy in any city in the world. Before we jump headfirst into this build, I want to say a quick thank you to my friends at diceboard.com for sponsoring this build. If you need to pick up a whole bunch of affordable dice for your game, especially if you're a dungeon master and you need a big arsenal of dice, diceboard.com will hook you up. The best part is, if you use the promo code in the description of the video below, you will get your entire order shipped to you anywhere in the world, expedited shipping for free. And that's a pretty good deal. Now, let's build some trees. The two main materials in this build are wooden dowels and green scouring pads. You want to take your dowels and sharpen the ends of them into a point. Now you could do this with an Olfa knife and it would work, but it's slow and a little bit dangerous. I realized after doing one that there's a much better way, a pencil sharpener. Yes, these wooden dowels are essentially just pencils, so grab a pencil sharpener and sharpen up all the points. Then you can start cutting the scouring pads into the various layers for the tree. And I found it was ideal to make 3 different sizes, so you could go from the widest at the base to the smallest at the top. For reference, the widest ones are about 2 inches square and the smallest ones about 3/4 of an inch square. Once you have a whole bunch of these squares cut, you can start rounding them, and you don't want to make perfect circles. You just want to make kind of roundish, ovalish shapes, but you also want to have a fair amount of variance at this point. It's best to pre-paint the wooden dowels before assembling the trees, and I just used a really watered down dark brown acrylic craft paint to do this, and then I used a scrap piece of foam to act as a bit of a drying rack while the paint dried. Assembling these trees could not be any easier. All you need to do is take your painted and sharpened dowel and a layer of the scouring pad. Take a bit of generic PVA glue, make a dab in the middle, and just skewer the scouring pad. Essentially, you're just making a shish kebab here. So if you've done that before, you can do this. What you want to do is put a few layers of each size, gradually getting smaller towards the top. To complete the very top of the tree, I just took some excess scrap scouring pad and cut a triangle and poked that onto the end and used a little bit of glue to hold it in place, and this made the point of the tree. If you really don't care how realistic these are and you just want something to serve a utility purpose on your gaming table, you could really consider these done at this point. They will look good enough to represent trees during your game. But if you want to make them look a little bit nicer, a little bit more realistic, you can move on to the next step. Because I was going to be using an aerosol spray adhesive, I wanted to protect the painted wooden dowels on the bottom of the trees. I didn't want them to get all tacky. So I wrapped them in toilet paper and used a tiny bit of tape to hold them in place. This way they wouldn't get covered in the glue. Using some insulation foam, I created another makeshift drying/transportation rack. This would be a way to hold all 20 of these trees while I moved them to where I would be doing the spraying and where they could sit and dry without me touching them. My adhesive of choice for this is some 3M77 spray adhesive. This is really strong commercial grade stuff. It bonds to just about everything and it works really, really well. You want to give the tree a good coating. You want to spray it from the underside and the top side to make sure that you get 100% coverage. Once you have total coverage with your tacky glue, you can sprinkle on some fine turf. Any brand or variety will work just fine. I used Woodland Scenics. Pick the color that you like, but you do want to use a finer turf. Sprinkle on a lot of this, really cover it. You don't want any missed spots. Don't worry, you won't waste any. Just make sure you have a clean, dry newspaper underneath to catch all of the excess, because you can just pour it back in the bottle after. One thing that is very important to note with using this adhesive is that it is really, really strong as far as chemicals go. You don't want to mess around with this stuff. You want to do it in a very well ventilated area or outside if possible. You also really want to protect your work surface with newspaper as the overspray gets everywhere. You can base these trees in a multitude of different ways. For me, the easiest and quickest way is to just grab some XPS foam, mill it down to about 3/4 of an inch thick, and cut out some kind of natural shapes on my PROXXON HOTWIRE table. I made some of these big enough to accommodate 3 trees, some big enough for 2, and a few big enough for 1, so that I had some variety when using these. Once your basic shape is cut out, you want to bevel the edges using a knife so that you get a bit of a gradual hill. If you want, you can make some surfaces a rocky face just by scraping it or carving it. If your terrain is only used for home use like mine is, and it just sits on a shelf between games, these bases will be plenty durable. However, if you're going to be doing a lot of gaming with these, say at a store or in a club, and you're going to be transporting them, the edges of the XPS foam bases will be a little bit fragile, and you should consider putting the XPS foam on a more durable base like MDF. Giving the foam a coat of Mod Podge will of course make them more durable, and as usual I used my combination of black paint and Mod Podge to also act as a primer. To paint out the bases, I first painted any of these surfaces that were a rocky face, and I did this really simply by just doing a coat of a kind of tan with a dry brushing of a white. The rest of the bases I just painted out in this kind of camo olive green. Afterwards, I gave everything a black wash. Really, I was only concerned about getting the wash on the stone bits, but by default it got on the green a bit. Not a big deal, as most of that would later be covered. While waiting for the wash to dry, I gave the trees a clear coating. This would really lock in all of that loose, fine turf so that it didn't shed everywhere, and it would make them even harder. I used this KRYLON matte clear coat because I wanted something that wouldn't apply any gloss whatsoever. Then I could remove the toilet paper that was protecting the wooden dowels. Using some tin snips, or you could use something like garden shears, you can cut the wooden dowels at the length that you want them, but you want to cut it into a point. Then you can use that point to stab and kind of skewer into the foam base, creating a hole where it will securely hold this tree in place. You want to just use a little bit of hot glue inside that hole and it will be really strong. I don't think these would ever break free or fall out.
To decorate the green part of these bases, you can apply some flocking to make it look a little bit nicer. Now, which flocking you use may depend on what gaming surface you play on. If you have a grass board that you've already made, it's a good idea to use the same turf that you used on that so it would match. If you use something like a battle mat, you can get away with doing whatever. To attach this flocking, all you need to do is brush on some really watered down PVA glue and get total coverage on everywhere you want it to stick. You can then sprinkle on the fine turf. Again, just like the trees, you want to get a lot on here so you get total coverage, shake off and save the excess. Once they are completely dry and there is no more wet PVA glue with, you can give the bases a coating in that same KRYLON clear coat that I used on the trees to lock in all of those fine fibers. The worst thing about flocking is that if it's not secured, it kind of gets everywhere, but this clear coat really gets rid of most of that shedding. Overall, I think these trees are a really cost-effective way to build up your arsenal of terrain, and they're really not that difficult to make. Again, I'd like to thank DiceBard for sponsoring this build. If you need to pick up any of the tools or supplies that I used in this build, you can head over to blackmagiccraft.ca, where I have my essential equipment store with links to all of the stuff that I use and recommend on Amazon. Purchasing through those links helps fund these videos. The other and best way that you can help fund these videos is by supporting Blackmagic Craft on Patreon. If you really love what I do for the community and you want to help me continue to do it, supporting me on Patreon is the absolute best way that you can do that. So I highly encourage you to check out the page and see what it's all about. I'd love to have you as the newest member of the Blackmagic Craft Fellowship.
That's it, that's all guys. I hope you found this video useful and inspiring, and if you did, hit that like button and drop me a comment below. If you make your own set of trees, I'd love to see them. Post some pictures in the Tabletop Crafters Guild Facebook community. Until next week guys, cheers and happy crafting.